You're listening to Data Science Leaders, the premier podcast for executives tackling the world's most important challenges using the power of machine learning. Let's dive in. The EU AI Act. Is it the first step towards comprehensive regulation that will make us all safer? Or is it the scariest thing facing AI leaders, more so than the AI singularity? Or is it both? Today, we're going to find out. I am joined by Adam Gale. He's the field CTO for AI and regulatory compliance at NetApp and is the perfect person to help us with this, as he is far more well-versed. He's done more of a deep dive on that AI Act than any other technology leader I know of. Adam, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for that amazing introduction.
For a lot of us, we're acting a little bit like an ostrich in the head in the sand. We really don't, we know the EU AI Act is coming, but we really don't want to deal with it and hoping somebody else will deal with it and hoping it won't impact us. So I'm curious, how did you come to know so much about it? Why did you delve into it so deeply?
Well, actually, this is quite an embarrassing story, really. I'm a bit of a regulation geek. It started a while ago when my daughter was born. She couldn't sleep. So I used to read her stories, and I ran out of stories to read her. So I started reading regulation. I forget how I came to it, but it was the Act of DORA, Digital Operational Resiliency Act. It's an EU resiliency in the financial markets. And she was asleep in seconds. So I carried on reading because I got interested. And ever since then, when I see a new act or I see something, I start picking it up and reading it to her or to myself. And as you can imagine, the dinner table conversations in my house are very riveting. And it kind of snowballed from there.
Would love to understand about the timing. So when it comes to the EU AI Act, it was arguably way earlier than any of the other major regulatory efforts. There being like certain individual US states were going in and putting in, like in Illinois, I think back in 2019 had this very random law about the use of video analysis software in hiring. But in terms of major pieces of regulation that were meant to be effective and applicable and affecting millions of people, the EUA Act is arguably the very first of these. And do you have a sense of why they were looking to get ahead of this? What was it that drove it to start so early on?
That's a really good question. I actually think there's a couple of reasons behind that. One, I think, and this is more of a personal opinion, is that we have been caught out by advances in technology previously. I mean, we all saw social media and the way it impacted everyday life and everybody. And that ran away with us, I think, for a number of years before we were able to get ahead of it and start regulating and only bring to heel now some of the larger organizations. And I think the EU saw that and wanted to make up for that, not have that happen here. There was also the political side of it too, and getting a piece out before anybody else and before elections, those sort of things play into this. So having spoke to a few people in the EU, there was the pressure to have this published and ready to go. And I think you'll see that in the Act because there are certain bits of it which are a bit woolly. And you could argue they're woolly good to give us room to grow or wiggle room. But that was also because it was a little bit rushed and there was pressure to get this done. But as you're completely right, there are certain areas of regulation which already have been thinking about AI, as you just mentioned. Recruitment is one area that they have sort of regulation about that already. And that nicely bleeds into other people's or other geos attempt to regulate AI. They have gone with a more of a vertical solution, or they've gone, say, for example, into the medical industry or into the recruitment industry and started regulating in those areas. The EU has gone with an all-encompassing piece. And I quite like it because it gives us good direction. It gives us a nice playing field. I personally operate a lot better when I know the rules of the game. But with that, you also get slight overlap, as you could probably imagine. There are other regulatory pieces out there that overlap and coincide with this.
Oh, indeed. Well, now you're making me think of things that were going on roughly around the time that the efforts around this regulation started, and it's probably not lining up perfectly. But there was the Clearview scandal on with facial recognition and scraping of social media, and I think there were certain landmark regulations around for social media companies that potentially could have affected this. But it sounds more likely that, well, this is actually an extension of existing regulatory efforts. It's sort of an outgrowth of GDPR or DORA, and a recognition that, AI and greater use of machine learning is coming on the scene, and these are potentially natural extensions of the regulatory framework that we put in place. But that's just pure speculation on my part, based off of the coincidence in timing.
I would be inclined to agree with you. I think particularly GDPR is the linchpin, and a lot of things fall back onto that. So I would agree with you there, definitely.
I've often been trying to think also as to why it was that the EU was so far ahead of the United States and other geos for this. And I'm wondering whether or not it was the threat of impact on employment. That very, very early on, with Gen AI, everybody was talking about these huge number of individuals that would be potentially put out of work off of this. And given the unemployment protections, social protections, the relative strength of labor unions, I could imagine that being much more of a worry that politicians had to adapt to over on the European side, on the US side. But again, pure speculation on my side.
Well, I think I have heard it said before, and particularly from my American counterparts, is that the EU regulates and the US innovates. I think that sometimes is quite a fair criticism. The EU definitely has a lot of regulation. There are a lot of overlapping, pieces, as I've said before, particularly in the digital space. And I can see the EU, struggling with that a little bit. So I'd also argue as well that the US has more larger tech companies than the EU that are in this space. I mean, if you look at the big three, you have Google, you have AWS, and you have Microsoft. They're some of the bigger players in the space of AI already. The EU doesn't have any big players. But when it comes to innovation, the Act specifically talks about this because we don't want to hamper innovation. So there are a couple of key pieces, particularly setting up labs, innovation labs or regulatory labs, where you can test out your AI to make sure it meets compliance. And that's written into the Act, which I think is great, because we do need more competition. We need to foster the small companies, allow them in, and allow them to grow, because the more competition, the better the market. So I think the EU has taken on board that criticism that may have been leveled at them in the past, that they regulate too much and that stifles innovation, and they're trying to address that in this Act.
Yeah, excellent. Well, that sort of brings me to the probably the most important thing, which is, well, what does that Act look like? I mean, what is it that every leader really should know about the EUA Act?
Really good question, actually. So the article, so the Act itself is broken down into articles. But if I could just summarize it very, very quickly. It is a risk-based approach. So when developing AI, you can fall into one of four categories. There is the top category, which is pretty much just banned. It's you're not allowed to do that. And you can think of things here like cognitive behavior manipulation. So a good example is, we're not allowed to use AI to create a child's toy that could make them do bad behavior or dangerous behavior, make them try and set fires or something like that. Now, I know everyone was dying to make a Chucky, and that was definitely what we invented AI. But unfortunately, we're not allowed to do that. And then you have the second category, which is the step below that, which is highly regulated. Now, this is the area that I find most interesting. This is areas like education or the medical industry, anything with a safety component, or transport. And what we have to do here then is delve into the Act and find out what we actually have to do, because there are a number of requirements for us. And there is some certifications like the CE mark you can get, which you can get in the EU. So that's probably the most interesting. And then below that, we have two further categories, which are more light touch. And we'll see things there like our current AI being regulated, like image generation. So you have to label things that are obviously fake and say this is image generated and this is an AI generated image, and publish summaries of your training material if you've used copyright material, those sort of things. But for me, the most interesting one is that second category. In fact, I have the Act open here. Maybe I should just actually read out those categories so there's no misunderstanding. They're unacceptable risk, high risk, limited, and minimal. So those are the four ones. When you are thinking about AI, and if you're a company and you're going to develop AI, you should look at it and see which one of yours fits into those categories. Most likely or not, it's probably going to be limited or minimal. But if you are developing high risk, then you definitely need to read into it and do some more research.
Well, I'd love to understand just how well those categories are defined. Like taking, for example, that cognitive behavior manipulation. It's easy to think about what we do in marketing or even in education as being a form of cognitive behavior manipulation, but arguably, at least in the education side, for a good cause. Is it clearly delineated in those articles where those boundaries lie, and what's on the side of education and what is on the side of cognitive behavior manipulation? Or is that something that still needs to be kind of worked out in the courts later on?
That is a very good question. And I believe it is probably the latter, things that will be worked out as we go along and we hit these roadblocks. As I mentioned before, there is quite a bit of wriggle room. And I spoke to Kai Zenner, who's one of the digital policy advisors in the EU for Axel Voss. I believe he's one of the members of the European Parliament. They were quite instrumental in writing this. And I believe he said, if I'm quoting him correctly here, was that we will be seeing further definitions, more clarification for exactly that reason that you just said there, that, where do we draw the line in the coming year? So we have these categories now. There are things that will fall between the cracks, but we will be getting more clear definitions in the coming year. There is actually a definitions part of the EU Act. So I love this. They give you a definitions article. It's such a geeky thing to love, I know, but I like reading through it, because if we all speak the same language and we all absolutely know what we are defining, for example, again, if something is high risk and I've got a clear definition of what high risk is, we know what the boundaries are and we know what we can develop. So if you do get a chance to read it, I would go through the definitions, because they do lay out specifically what some of these things are. So that's a great part of it.
I mean, certainly that's a massive problem that we've had in the industry since time immemorial. I mean, what are we referring to when it comes to machine learning? What are we referring to when it comes to artificial intelligence or data science? Where do the boundaries of all of those lie? So to the extent that we can align on a common vocabulary, we probably will be able to make a lot more headway. That being said, I'm now very interested to go and look up their definition of artificial intelligence, because I have not yet found a definition that I could not poke holes in to a large degree. So
absolutely. I guess it definitely does, isn't it? Going back to something that you just mentioned earlier, actually, though, I thought was quite interesting. I think you mentioned marketing and education. Marketing is an area that I'm very interested in when it comes to this. And I was doing some Googling the other day, and they were using, in England or UK, we were using artificial intelligence on our rail networks. I believe it was at the turnstiles in major train stations in the UK, in London specifically. And what they were doing is using cameras to scan people's faces and assess their emotions. And then I believe they were looking to market to them. So if they were hungry, we'd advertise a sandwich, those sort of things. And I think this only came to light a little while ago. And obviously there was quite a bit of pushback. I particularly don't want to be, scanned. I don't want my emotions put into a database and things like that, and then marketed to as a sandwich. I mean, I'm not sure how useful the information would be for a start, because this is London and most people walk around being slightly annoyed. So you're probably just going to get lots of pictures of people being slightly annoyed. But this is a great example of somebody using AI, potentially without us knowing about it, in an unregulated manner. So the Act would go some way to address that, because that could potentially fall into the high risk area. And when we are doing high risk things, there are a number of things we need to follow. First of all, we need to be able to log the information. So if the AI is making a decision that is potentially safety critical, we need to log that decision, and we need to keep it for a period of time, depending on which industry it's in. If it's a medical industry and maybe we're operating on someone, and it's not far-fetched example that we would use AI to help operations, and the AI decides that we will do this, we will do that, we need to keep that decision for a certain amount of time. And if someone is authenticating that decision too, they're saying, yes, the AI is correct, let's go ahead with that procedure, or let's go ahead with that diagnosis, we absolutely need somebody with a name recorded next to that. And that needs to be kept for a certain amount of time too. So there are a number of triggers in the articles, which I think are very good, and just, general common sense along those lines, those sort of things.
Well, certainly, when it comes to the usage of one of these solutions, it absolutely makes sense that we want to have oversight on that. We want to have documentation around that. But I guess thinking as a developer or a builder of these systems, does the article also extend into that development period? Because at the end of the day, I can detect when a system has gone wrong in production, but if I don't know what was done in development, if I don't know what data was trained on, if I don't know how the model was trained, if I don't know what that, if I can't track that lineage from that prediction back to the model, to the code and to the data, I kind of have to start reinventing the wheel if I want to try and fix it. I break a continuous improvement cycle. Or I also make it much harder to diagnose. Is how much does the EUA Act also require documentation about the development of these systems, or is it mostly focused on the post-deployment side?
No, you're absolutely right. It definitely there is a requirement for a documentation. And specifically, it talks about making it human readable. I think in the IT industry, we have a habit of making things incredibly complex for ourselves because we are technical people. We like to create technical things. I love jumping into command prompt and that sort of thing. But the average person doesn't like to jump into the command prompt line, doesn't want to do that sort of thing. They need something that's human readable. So the Act does definitely talk about that, about making things accessible and providing documentation, not just for the end user, but also the people that are developing it, and then will maintain it as well. So absolutely. It's not extensively detailed because there is, again, wiggle room here. And I think if you regulate too much in this area, you will stifle the innovation. And there's also the argument too that things change so quickly. They're so quickly that if we regulate the technology, by the time we come to ratify it, the technology will have moved on. So I believe it is right that we should regulate its use rather than specific technologies and such.
Well, does the EUA Act create some kind of authority that can go in and make those adjustments on a faster basis versus it needing to be decided on through the EU Parliament and others? So, thinking through how we go and regulate financial services, it is usually through the establishment of a regulatory authority that has that ability to act a lot faster than the politicians can. Is there a similar thing in the EUA Act, or is that something which will potentially needs to be created afterwards, or just something that's not actually even thought about at all?
No, actually, they are setting up an AI office. There is an incredibly long title for it, I believe, which is typical of the EU. They like to create acronyms and long titles for these things. So the name escapes me. I will dig it out and I'll send it to you. So we can put it in the notes for anyone interested. But they are setting up this AI office, which will help with exactly those things. There's actually a good number of bits like that, setting up AI offices, setting up centers of excellence, and again, setting up those labs where you can put your artificial intelligence and test it against the regulations, make sure it meets it. So there is a lot of help there. And I think it's for exactly what you just talked about. These are things that as developers we want, and we want help with.
Yes, and certainly that flexibility to be able to go in and understand what those use cases are. The big challenge right now on going in and creating a use case based regulatory framework is the use cases that we have right now are still very much in most of the ones that we are so excited about are still largely hypothetical, and so it's good to hear that they're building in a good degree of flexibility here and adaptability there. Now we haven't mentioned the thing that everybody is most excited / fearful of, which is of course the fines. Now we all know that top line number, the 7% of global revenue / turnover, or 30 million euros, I think it was, whichever is higher. But that's for the prohibited use cases. And how does that decrease as you work down those different tiers?
I believe it's two steps. So there's a 7% and a 3%, and those will fall into the categories depending on which category it falls into, whether it's high risk or banned, or whether it's low risk or limited. And this is something that I think the EU does very, very well, because it is a percentage based with cap, obviously, as you've seen, which is similar to the way they've done GDPR, and also they've done DORA, which is the Digital Operational Resiliency Act. They baked these in because they're not just speeding tickets, if you will. They're actual fines that make people sit up and listen. Some businesses, I think, generally think that, oh, well, this will just become a cost of doing business. So we'll take the fine and we'll move on. But no, these are quite punitive. And I believe I've had conversations with people before as well, and they've not really realized the extent of which the EU has pursued these fines. I believe there's a website, if you Google it, GDPR fines, there's a big list of companies who have been fined for GDPR non-compliance. And there's some big names on there, and there's some hefty fines. So, again, I am a quite big fan of that. I like the way that they're being quite honest about this and quite upfront that we will fine people for breaches in these things. But to go back to your original question, yeah, it's two steps. There is the 7% and the 3%, each with limits, their own limits.
Well, speaking of speeding tickets, I think this is how the Finnish do speeding tickets, where it's a percentage of your income. Are there things that folks can do to get ahead of needing to go and justify what they're doing to a regulator going forward? Is it just what we do for like heavily regulated financial services use cases, like for credit risk scoring models, or for in clinical trials and submitting those to regulators? Should folks be going in and starting to implement those processes right now, those for documentation, lineage, reproducibility, and things, or is it it's too soon? We don't know whether that would actually help or be just a waste of effort.
Oh, no, I think now is the time. I would capitalize on it. The act is there to read. There's some very good parts of it. For example, if we go back to the image generation, it's very well documented. You should be labeling them. What I've seen in industry is a lot of people setting up centers of excellence within their organization. So dedicating somebody to go through the act, for example, and read it, and then reach out to, there are other organizations who are pursuing something similar. I believe there's even been a few companies which have started springing up, which are helping with AI regulation. And they're helping you, try and meet the regulation, even though, again, it has only just been published. So this is a growing industry. So I'd encourage people to do that, set up a center of excellence. First, sit down and read it. It is actually quite interesting, and it's written in a way that, you can understand it. The average person can quite understand it. And it's further broken down too. If you go to the EU's website, and again, I'll send you the link so you can put that in there. They've written it out in very easy terms for you to understand. They've laid out, the risk categories, and what you should be doing. So it is all there, for consumption. So I'd set up the Centre of Excellence, I'd nominate somebody to read it, and I'd start doing that, documenting. Because also, if you have a trail, if you say, I did this because I thought this, so I didn't label that image because I didn't think I had to, because of this reason, I think no one can really tell you off for that. I think as long as you've got justification for what you've done, I think there is wiggle room and leeway.
Well, it also sounds like, from what you were saying before, also make sure that you're compliant with existing regulations. So recognizing that an AI application is also a data application and is regulated under GDPR, and or that an AI application also has the same reliability requirements that it would have under DORA. So often we tend to tend to forget that in the machine learning AI space, because we're always in prototype mode, we're always in development mode, and not yet thinking about the fact that at the end of the day, this is an application that's consuming data, and that is already regulated under these existing laws. So just because it may or may not, it might still be unclear whether it is regulated under the upcoming EU AI Act, it doesn't mean you should be thinking about ensuring that your application is enterprise grade and governed in the way that you would have needed to ensure under the prior legislation. Or is that not the case? And we can
I think you're actually quite right there. I'm sorry, I don't want to turn this into a DORA discussion. I feel like I've mentioned it way too many times already. But for example, there is a requirement in DORA that in the financial industry, if you have a critical service, like the backbone of your organization, you have to ensure that it is redundant, fully redundant, and you can spool it back up and not miss a beat for your customers. Because obviously, if we start taking down financial organizations, they have huge repercussions for our economy and can affect other people's economies. So this is the right thing to do. But if you're using AI in that space, maybe it's trading, or maybe it's insurance, and it's a critical application, you would by nature under DORA, or just as a business, have a redundant copy of that. You would have a fallback system that you can fall back onto. Now that's in DORA, and there's an equal piece in the AI Act saying that if this is a critical system, or this is in that bracket, it's very important, needs to be regulated, that you should have a redundancy. Doesn't specify whether it's back to paper and pen or whether or not it's somebody sat in a room who can pick up the slack. Like, let's take the example of trains. If we start using AI to route trains based on demand and load, which is, something we could do, something that's foreseeable. We need a fallback system, because what happens when the AI stops? We need somebody to pick up a piece of pen and say, okay, I need to route this train here. I need to route that train there. So exactly right. If you are following other regulation very well, and I use that example of DORA there's a high likelihood that you will have already met some of the requirements of the AI Act in your critical services. And the similar goes for GDPR.
Well, I'm always struck by how in the AI and machine learning space, we're always rediscovering the lessons learned in software development. And so it's often valuable to go in and think about your AI solution as if it was a standard application. What kind of testing and reliability would you do with it? What kind of documentation would you have? And it sounds like in the regulatory space, this is similarly. We should be, if you think about how a standard application is affected by existing regulation, and apply that to your AI-based application, a lot of it probably will transfer over. And so in terms of your efforts at getting better about thinking about your AI machine learning initiatives as traditional, or a certain part of and involved with traditional software development, it sounds like that will also put you ahead of the curve when it comes to regulatory compliance as well.
Absolutely. I think a lot of it, and I dare say this is common sense, actually. A lot of it, I think, is good. It's good behavior. It's a behavior that we've been doing for a lot of time, as you said. Making redundant copies of things, making things highly available when they're critical, having logs, and writing documentation. And I've heard, I don't know if it's true or not, that AI is good at writing documentation. Maybe we could use AI to write the documentation for the AI.
I'm sure it's already happening, and there probably should be better governance and reliability and testing around it. That as well.
Oh, I think we're getting to a feedback loop here, aren't we?
We are indeed. It gets very meta very quickly. Well, one thing I wanted to touch on was the scope of the law in terms of its ability to keep us safe. It's very much oriented towards organizations and users who, at the end of the day, do want to do the right thing. So, lawful standard enterprises. But to what degree does the law help make us safer for folks who are intentionally malicious? So when I think about the biggest threats from AI today, it's in fraud, electoral misinformation, the worrying trend about deepfakes for non-consensual pornography. And, often these are not using commercial applications. There might be some startups off there that are off the reservation, but for the most part, I see the worry being malicious actors who are not registered, who are also then using open source models. So not even the hosted LLMs available from OpenAI, Anthropic, and the like. To what degree does the law give us protections or help us make us safer against those? Or is that really outside of the scope?
I think, that's a really good point. You are naturally going to find most organizations wanting to comply. So let's take a good example of one of the banned things we shouldn't be doing. Real-time and remote biometric identification, such things as facial recognition. So what we mean there is, let's go back to that train station. Can you guess that I like trains? I always end up talking about trains, don't I? We're not allowed to use cameras to pick out people in a crowd and log them in a database and say, that's Adam, he's traveling so-and-so. We're not allowed to do that. But there is an exception. We are allowed to do it if there is a law enforcement requirement, such as a missing person. Or I imagine there's a terrorist threat or something along those lines. So it keeps us safe in there. It keeps structure and rigidity to government bodies or enforcement from blurring the lines and going a bit too far. But I think to speak to your part, which is nefarious actors who aren't looking to do that anyway, they're looking to be nefarious, I think we would probably be pursuing them with other laws. This is pretty much more for, I would say, the corporates or the small startups trying to do good. Yeah, I'm not sure how we would be approaching this. I'll leave that to the lawmakers and the people pursuing them. But yeah, I definitely agree that I think this is much more for private enterprises and public organizations who are looking to use AI in a safe manner in the first place.
Mm. So arguably, it almost sounds like we should be going and putting pressure for them to think of an additional set of regulation that would be harmonizing and coordinating efforts to go in and tackle those unlawful, and intentionally unlawful use cases for AI. So it's a beginning.
But I think it's a very topical subject because we see a lot of misinformation on the internet all the time. I have my parents are both 70, and they've learned to use Facebook in the latter years. And I often have my mum calling me up saying, "Oh, have you seen this? They're stealing dogs in the local area," and she'll show me a photo on her phone, and it's quite clearly AI generated, and it's quite clearly fake, and it's not true at all. And how do you track these people down? How do you go about applying these laws? It's a very topical thing. I think we encounter a lot of misinformation every single day. So I'm interested to see where this takes us and interested to see how we will combat it. In my opinion, I think we'll see a shift towards enforcing these laws, not necessarily the EU Act when it comes to that, but all the other ones surrounding it in the coming years.
Yeah, as with everything, the problem with technology isn't the technology; it's the people. And so it's when we're talking about regulating AI, to state the obvious, we're talking about regulating the people who are using artificial intelligence, and that's always a thorny, difficult topic and a journey. Never something that can be solved with just one piece of regulation. So wanted to delve into what folks should do. What are you advising enterprises to do to this? You had mentioned set up a center of excellence, read the laws, get an understanding of it. I think we've also touched on that there are ways in which we should harden the development and operationalization of enterprise AI applications in the same way that we do for all of our regular applications. Any other things? Is this something that?
Absolutely. I'll probably pick on a couple of my favorites, and I realize what that makes me sound like, saying that I favor articles in the Act. But 12 is record keeping, and that discusses your record keeping for AI. That's a great one. I'd start there. I'd read that. I'd also read accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity. I believe that's 15. Quality of system management. I believe that's 17. And auto-generated logs. I believe that's 15 or 16. No, sorry, 19. They've probably moved the article numbers around. But what you do is you open up the article and, you open up the Act. Again, I'll place the link, and then you can just Control F, find, and then scoot down to it and read it. But there's some really good stuff here. Stuff as, IT people we should be looking at and reading. I've already discussed the logs, but I'll just touch back on that again. And this is what the requirement here is: traceability. Building a reference database, not just the decisions, but the input criteria. So this is high risk again. If we go back to the medical example of someone using AI as a medical tool to help people, if it was giving out prescriptions, then we need to know what we put in to generate the output, and that needs to be logged. And what I would suggest here is look at its immutability too, because in all things, we need to look at our cyber resilience. Because AI will be attacked. It will be used to attack, and it will be used as an attack vector as well. So these logs would be the first thing I'd go after as a nefarious actor. I would make those logs immutable, and I'd ship them to a third location too, keep them parceled away, particularly for those high-risk AI environments that you want to be able to prove traceability. So with that, I would use technology like some of the stuff we do at NetApp, which is where we make storage completely undeletable for a certain amount of time.
I mean, it sounds like a lot of these are features and capabilities that you might already have in your technology solutions. And it sounds like, well, and if you don't, you should probably go and yell at the providers of those platforms to go in and start implementing those. And if they don't, it sounds like go look for additional solutions that can provide that governance and logging and auditability and the immutability of those logs and things of that nature. And it sounds like, well, you could probably draw and identify a lot of those directly from the legislations themselves.
Absolutely. It's amazing how meeting the requirements, we already have a lot of the tools already in place, whether it be the frameworks which we've developed for other things, or whether it be the actual cybersecurity tools that we have. These things are already out there, so we can apply them to meet these requirements. One of the good ones in Article 13, I believe it talks about transparency and user information. And what I find with this is it's bad data in, bad data out. I think we all saw the example of Gemini recommending glue in cheese for a recipe for pizza. I always found that one particularly funny because what had happened is it used the data from Reddit. It scanned Reddit and someone was talking about putting glue in cheese to take a picture. So when they pull the pizza slice up, you get the big strands and it's meant for marketing material. But AI didn't know the difference, did it? And it just scanned that as a training set and then spat out that recipe. And I guess it's a sausage machine. What you put in is what you get out. So you need to put in good data. And here, if we're using this at an enterprise level, if we're looking at, say, creating a model on your data at Domino AI or our own at NetApp, we need to make sure our data is quality. And we use our tools there to scan through the data, to look at it, place it in the right buckets, put the right metadata with it, even delete data you don't need. And again, I always like to circle back to security here. And I shouldn't say this, but the most secure data is deleted data. If you don't need it, delete it. If you're not meant to keep it, so if you're not required to keep it and, it's not of use anymore, then delete it. It's just taking up space. It takes up power. Get rid of it. And it's more secure that way. So we have tools in our disposal, in our kit bag to make data better. So we get better outputs. Another really fascinating one for me is, I believe it's Article 14. And we're talking here about, oversight of AI, that is. Looking for anomalies, looking for dysfunctions and unexpected performance. And why do we care about this? Because as I mentioned earlier, AI will probably be used at some point for attack, or it will be attacked. So we need to look at it and make sure it's not doing things that it shouldn't be doing. And we should also create a big red stop button too. And that is talked about in the Act, creating an actual stop button. But that's quite a contentious issue. Just delving into that, I'm going to unpack that real quick. Because again, it was something I discussed with Guy, one of the policy advisors. And apparently there was a great debate about this, about putting a stop button in AI. And my first initial reaction was absolutely put a stop button in it. I don't want this thing to go Terminator. So, he said, but what if we're using it again in the medical industry and it's performing an operation or assisting with an operation and the surgeon thinks we should stop it, but actually the AI is right? Where do we draw the line? If the AI is doing something that is critical, should we be able to stop it? So that was a great debate, from what I understand, about putting that requirement in for a stop button. But on a less critical level, you can see why you would need to pull the plug on AI. So these are some of the requirements. And to meet those requirements, particularly looking for anomalous behavior in our AI or looking for someone attacked it, we have to use AI to do that. We have to use user behavior analytics, which is where we look at an environment with AI and we train it on your environment. So, for example, Adam here, I create PowerPoints. I'm not saying that's all I do. I do other things. I promise you, if my manager's listening to me, I do other things. But if I started deleting financial records, or I started altering training data sets, or messing with things, the AI would pop up, or the user behavior analytics would pop up and say, that's not what Adam does. That's not his normal user behavior. We need to stop him from doing that. And the reason we need to stop this is because there is a worry about data poisoning. We could theoretically have somebody poison a data training set. And that is used in the Act. The Act, they talk about data poisoning and such. They talk about their worry. There is a worry that someone would mess with a training data set and then potentially have a ticking time bomb on an AI, make it do something it shouldn't do. So we have to use the tools that we've got available to us. And user behavior analytics is one of the things that we do excellently at NetApp. We look into your environment because we own the data and we scan it. And we can do things like, as I said, if I started doing something I shouldn't do, we can automate a response. So either we can lock me down, stop me from doing what I'm doing. We can take a snap of your environment, which is like a DVI. You can roll back to where the last known good point, or we can create a copy of it. We can do pretty much anything with our environment automatically. And we have to use AI here because there's not enough security people on the planet. We can't train enough people, and we can't, as human beings, react quick enough. We have to use the technology in hand to be able to defend against these things. And as I said, these are some of the bits in the Act that are actually a requirement, things that you have to do. Sorry, I went on a bit of a monologue there, didn't I?
Not at all, but I think it's one of the most essential things to always keep on reminding folks is that, well, we've been talking about ensuring that we use AI safely. We're missing what's arguably the biggest opportunity here for us as human beings, which is to improve safety with AI. But not just safety, but also everything from ethical behavior, medical practice, you name it. There's opportunities here in order to go above and beyond what we currently do in a very flawed way as people today, leveraging AI. And we should never miss out or miss that opportunity, because that's really where the big opportunity for human advancement really lies.
Mm. I think you're right there. And you touched on a really interesting point, which is a bit, I guess, philosophical for me. One of the main, or so a couple of the main requirements of the Act are, and these are the overarching themes, is to make AI safe, make it transparent, traceable, environmentally friendly where possible. And I think that's an interesting subject. Could talk all day about that one, because you saw, I think Google in 2019 reported that there was a 50% increase in their carbon emissions, putting back their net zero goal at 2030 quite significantly. And that was because of the amount of infrastructure they'd implemented for AI. Like, it's incredible how much power this stuff absorbs. And then you have Microsoft looking at, modular nuclear reactors for powering data centers. That's phenomenal for me to think. Like, we have a private company looking at building nuclear reactors to power data centers. I never thought I'd see that sort of thing. That's amazing. But obviously, it's a very topical subject, and these are some of the main themes. And the other one is making AI unbiased where possible. And I think that's a very difficult subject, and it's it's one that I like to think about, like to talk about, because if we're building things here on training data sets, things that we've created, and we have natural inherent biases, how do we go about eliminating those and creating something from a clean slate? Yeah.
Yes. If you think AI is biased, have you tried people?
Yes. Yeah. So I bring that up because I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Oh, it's a wonderful topic in and of itself. As you say, there's there are both opportunities, both in order to improve our decision making, to go in and actually make our decision making less biased, because unlike people, we can realistically and reliably test models. We can gain people. People claim that we can explain our decisions, but in actuality, we've got plenty of evidence that shows that our decisions are made on factors that we are not aware of, and that we are just coming up with ex post explanations after the fact that often can be very tenuously correlated to why we made our decisions. Models, not really the same problem. You can test them in simulated accurate settings very easily, and you can actually get a lot of explainability out from them. Being able to intuit what they mean, different story. But in terms of seeing what they do, they're a lot more visible about how they're functioning than certainly we are as people, as witnessed by the fact that you try and get an executive to make a real world decision in an MRI. It's remarkably difficult to go in and make that a realistic scenario. So it is one where the opportunities there are incredible, but also the opportunities for screwing up, the opportunities for magnifying our own biases, for taking shortcuts, and especially in the past where there wasn't much oversight or regulation, people didn't understand what the data scientists or the models were doing, and were allowing them to operate over in a silo without a whole lot of transparency. A lot of shortcuts have been made, and often not even the fault of the people building the models. It was often that these were the requirements that were given to them, and there wasn't a process to go in and ensure that this was ultimately for the best interest of the organization, of society, etc. So the great thing about regulation is that it shines a light around this. It creates an incentive to go in and make sure that we finally invest in the governance processes and the security solutions that we should always have had in place, and invest in testing and reliability, again, that we should have always had there. But without an external enforcement mechanism like regulation, it always pushed to the side. So where have we seen folks implement the most governance around AI? Well, it's been in financial services, insurance, the life sciences, and public sector. And why is that? Well, because they are the ones with the most regulatory oversight. So the hope here is that, well, now that incentive is there. Leadership of all organizations will find a need to go in and prioritize these things that we should be doing. We just also need to make sure that we're not stifling innovation at the same time, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, going in and just putting a stop to everything that we wanted to do with AI. Because at the end of the day, it still is our best option today for going in and improving business outcomes and improving society more broadly. But sorry, now I'm monologuing at you. So Adam, thank you very, very much for sharing all of your thoughts and insights on this, and obviously an extremely important topic that is only going to become more important as we go forward. If folks want to get in touch with you and to find out more about what you are doing to help organizations with regulatory compliance, and what NetApp is doing to help organizations comply with the UI Act and other laws, how should they reach out? Where should they go?
Oh, great. So, yes, please do add me on LinkedIn. Anyone who would like to connect. My name is Adam Gale, spelled Gale. There's a great big picture of me on the front, so I'm quite easy to spot. And I work for NetApp. That's NETAPP. Just give us a Google and type in AI afterwards, and you'll hit our landing page. And you can pretty much go from there. If you've already got NetApp and you're all familiar with us, then just contact your rep and ask them to direct you to either me or someone in the AI space.
And definitely go and watch Adam's wonderful keynote over at RevX over in London. And you can find that at domino.ai/RevX/videos.
That was a good day, that. I really enjoyed that. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been listening to Data Science Leaders from Domino Data Lab. If you found our discussion insightful, be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. Your support helps us deliver cutting-edge content and keep the data science community informed and inspired. We appreciate every review. Until next time.